The spotlight burned against my face as I stood center stage, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it over the orchestra. Through the blinding white light, I could just make out the faces in the front row. Mother's powdered cheeks already tightening with displeasure, Clarissa's perfect smile frozen in confusion, and Father's heavy jowls settling into their familiar scowl. They had come expecting a scandal, hungry to watch me humiliate myself one final time. Instead, I was about to give them exactly what they deserved. Ladies and gentlemen, I projected my voice across the packed theater, every syllable crisp and clear, thanks to months of vocal training. Tonight's performance is dedicated to my beloved family. This piece is called The House of Wolves. I watched Mother's fan snap open. She always did that when she was nervous. Good. The first notes of the piano began, mournful and low, and I launched into the opening monologue. A tale of a girl born into a family that never wanted her, a spare heir, an inconvenience, a target for every cruelty that privilege could devise. Every word was true. Every scene I was about to perform had happened to me. Or rather, it had happened in my first life. The poison had tasted like almonds the first time I died. I was 19, clutching my acceptance letter to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, finally about to escape. Clarissa had made me tea that afternoon, her smile so sweet, so sisterly. To celebrate, she'd said. I'd been stupid enough to drink it. I woke up in my 12-year-old body, 7 years in the past, gasping and thrashing in my childhood bed. At first, I thought it was a nightmare, but the memories were too vivid, too precise. Every beating, every stolen accomplishment, every carefully orchestrated humiliation, I remembered it all, and I remembered how it ended with my sister's poison and my parents' relief. But this time, I wouldn't be their victim. This time, I would make them pay. The abuse had started the day I was born, or so Mother liked to remind me. You nearly killed me coming into this world, she'd hiss whenever I displeased her. 36 hours of labor, and for what? A plain, sullen thing that looks nothing like either of us. I learned early that I was the mistake. The accident that had happened after Clarissa, the golden child, the perfect daughter. Where Clarissa had Mother's delicate features and Father's striking blue eyes, I was all sharp angles and muddy coloring. Forgettable, unremarkable. Father never said it outright, but I could see it in the way his gaze would slide past me at family dinners, how he'd introduce Clarissa to his business associates while I stood invisible at his elbow. The real torment began when we were old enough to compete. Clarissa was naturally gifted at everything she touched: painting, piano, needlework, mathematics. She absorbed knowledge like sunlight and reflected it back twice as bright. I had to claw for every accomplishment, staying up late into the night to practice, to study, to perfect. And whenever I succeeded, whenever I managed to excel at something through sheer, stubborn effort, that success would somehow become Clarissa's. The piano recital when I was 13 was the first time I truly understood the game. I'd spent months preparing a complex sonata, practicing until my fingers cramped, until I could play it in my sleep. The night of the performance, I walked on stage to find my sheet music had been replaced with something I'd never seen before. I stumbled through it, humiliated, while Mother and Father sat stone-faced in the audience. Clarissa performed after me, playing my sonata, the one I'd prepared, flawlessly. She took her bow to thunderous applause. Backstage, I'd found my real sheet music in the trash, torn to pieces. You must have grabbed the wrong folder, Clarissa said sweetly when I confronted her. How careless of you. It happened again and again. The essay that won the school competition was submitted under her name instead of mine, a simple clerical error. The scholarship application that I'd spent weeks perfecting was never sent. Clarissa's half-finished one arrived the day of the deadline with my research attached. My acceptance to the youth theater program was rescinded when the director received an anonymous letter claiming I'd plagiarized my audition piece. A week later, Clarissa was enrolled instead. When I tried to tell Mother, she slapped me. Don't you dare accuse your sister of your own failures, she snarled. Clarissa succeeds because she's talented. You fail because you're not. It's time you accepted that. Father was worse in his indifference. He simply didn't care. Clarissa was his investment, his legacy. I was an expense to be minimized. He paid for Clarissa's private tutors, her riding lessons, her debut dresses. My clothes were handed down, altered poorly to fit my different frame. My schooling was the cheapest available. When I begged for piano lessons like Clarissa's, he told me we couldn't afford luxuries for both daughters. But I could hear him discussing Clarissa's new Arabian mare at dinner that night. The physical abuse was almost a relief compared to the psychological warfare. At least when mother backhanded me for insolence, when father took his belt to me for laziness, I knew where I stood. The bruises were honest. But the gaslighting, the constant rewriting of reality, the way they could look me in the eye and deny things I knew had happened, that was the real poison. In my first life, it had killed me slowly, eroding my sense of self until I was a ghost in my own family. By the time Clarissa put actual poison in my tea, I was already half dead. But I'd been given a second chance. The rebirth had given me more than just foreknowledge, it had given me clarity. When I woke up in my 12-year-old body, still groggy from the impossible transition, my first coherent thought was, I know how this story ends. My second thought was, not this time. I lay in bed that first morning taking inventory. I was 12, Clarissa was 14. The piano recital disaster hadn't happened yet. The scholarship theft was 2 years away. My murder was 7 years in the future. I had time. More importantly, I had knowledge. I knew every move they would make, every trap they would set. I'd lived through it once. This time, I could see them coming. But knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to be smart. I needed a plan. And most crucially, I needed to survive until I was old enough to escape. So I became docile, compliant. I stopped fighting for recognition, stopped competing with Clarissa, stopped expecting anything from my parents. I made myself small and unobtrusive, a piece of furniture they could ignore. When they insulted me, I nodded. When they struck me, I apologized. When Clarissa took credit for my work, I smiled and congratulated her. It nearly killed me a second time, swallowing all that rage. But I forced it down, deep down, and let it crystallize into something cold and hard and patient. Because I had a secret now. I had something they would never see coming. I'd discovered it by accident 3 months after my rebirth. I'd been alone in the estate library, the one room in the house where I could hide, reading about the traveling theatrical troupes that performed in the city squares. I'd always loved the theater, even in my first life, though my parents had forbidden me from pursuing it. Not suitable for a girl of our class, Mother had declared. But now, sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor, I felt something ignite in my chest. This is how I survive, I thought. This is how I become someone they can't touch. I started small. I'd sneak out to watch the street performers in the market square, studying their techniques, their timing, their ability to hold a crowd. I practiced voices and accents in my room, crafting characters in my head. I wrote scenes, dialogues, monologues, pouring all my rage and pain into stories that felt true because they were. When I turned 14, I found the Moonlight Players. They were a small troupe, barely scraping by, performing in taverns and town squares for coin. But their lead actress, Margot, had been trained at the Royal Academy decades ago, and she saw something in me when I nervously auditioned for them in a back alley behind the theater district. "You've got ghosts in your eyes, girl," she said, after I finished my monologue, a piece I'd written about a girl trapped in a golden cage, the kind that make for powerful performances. "Come back tomorrow. We'll see if you can take direction." For the next 5 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful, invisible daughter, absorbing abuse and biding my time. By night, I was Margot's protege, learning everything she could teach me about the craft of performance. I learned how to command a stage, how to make an audience laugh or weep with just a shift in inflection. I learned combat choreography and dance, costume design, and script analysis. I learned how to become someone else entirely. More importantly, I learned how to weaponize the truth. "The best drama comes from life," Margot told me once, watching me rehearse a scene I'd written about a jealous sister. "But you have to know how to shape it, how to make the audience feel what you felt. Raw pain isn't art. Refined pain, that's where the power is." By 17, I was performing in real productions, small roles at first, then larger ones. I performed under a stage name, Aria Blackwood, and always in theaters far enough from home that my family would never stumble across me. The Moonlight Players were growing in reputation, and so was I. Margot began writing roles specifically for me, showcasing my range and intensity. You're going to be something extraordinary, she told me after a particularly powerful performance of Lady Macbeth. I can feel it. But I wasn't content with just being a good actress. I had a greater purpose. I had a family to destroy. I started documenting everything. Every cruel word, every stolen achievement, every bruise. I kept journals hidden in the theater, recording conversations verbatim. I saved every letter, every note, every scrap of evidence that proved what they'd done to me. I befriended the household staff and learned their secrets too. How father was embezzling from his business partners, how mother was carrying on an affair with the family attorney, how Clarissa had seduced and ruined the reputation of 3 different men to climb the social ladder. I learned that my parents had stolen my inheritance from my grandmother, money that had been left specifically to me in a trust they'd managed to access through forged documents. I learned that Clarissa had burned my original acceptance letter to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts before I could see it. Yes, I'd been accepted in my first life, but I'd never known because the letter had never reached me. Every secret, every crime, every moment of cruelty. I collected them all like poisonous flowers, pressing them carefully between the pages of my memory, waiting for the right moment to display them. That moment came 3 weeks ago. I was 19 again, the same age I'd been when I died in my first life. The Moonlight Players had been invited to perform at the Grand Celestial Theater for a month-long engagement, the most prestigious venue in the capital, the kind of opportunity that could make a career. Margot had handed me the script for the final performance with trembling hands. "Write something true," she said, something that will make them remember us forever. So I wrote The House of Wolves. It was autobiographical, barely fictionalized, a searing indictment of familial abuse dressed up as Gothic tragedy. Every scene was pulled from my life. The poisoned tea, the stolen accomplishments, the casual cruelties of parents who saw their child as a burden rather than a person. I wrote monologues that ripped open old wounds and forced the audience to look inside. I wrote dialogue that captured the exact cadence of my mother's dismissive voice, my father's cold indifference, my sister's saccharine malice. And then I did something that would have been impossible without my rebirth. I sent them tickets. 4 tickets, front row center, delivered to the family estate with a note. "Come see what your daughter has made of herself. A." They came, of course. They couldn't resist the opportunity to see me fail publicly one more time. I'd barely spoken to them in 2 years since I'd moved into the theater district and stopped coming home except for mandatory appearances at family events. They assumed I was scraping by as some minor performer in traveling shows, an embarrassment they tolerated only because disowning me would cause talk. They had no idea what I'd become. They had no idea what I was about to do. The turning point had come 6 months ago when I'd made my decision with absolute clarity. I was backstage at the Riverside Theater waiting to go on for a performance of Antigone. I played the title role, the woman who defied tyranny and paid the price. As I stood in the wings listening to my cue, I caught sight of my reflection in a mirror, stage makeup transforming me into someone regal and tragic, someone with purpose and power. This is who I am now, I thought, not their victim, their reckoning. After the performance, I sat down with Margot and told her everything, all of it. The abuse, the theft, the murder in my first life, the impossible rebirth that had given me a second chance. I expected her to think I was mad. Instead, she poured us both wine and listened without interruption. "I believe you," she said when I finished. "I've seen too much strangeness in this world to doubt impossible things. And I've watched you for 5 years now, watched how you carry yourself like someone who's already died once. It makes sense. I want to expose them," I told her. "Everything they've done, every crime, every cruelty. I want to put it on stage and make them watch." Margot smiled, sharp as a knife. "Then let's write you a masterpiece." We spent months crafting it. I wrote the bones of the story, the raw emotional truth. Margot helped me refine it into something theatrical, something that would work on stage while still maintaining its devastating authenticity. We built in evidence, documents that would be displayed as props, letters that would be read aloud, financial records that would be projected on screens during key scenes. But the real genius was in the structure. The House of Wolves was framed as a cautionary tale, a story about a corrupt family that destroys itself through its own cruelty. The protagonist, called simply the daughter, was reborn with knowledge of her family's sins and Manesin uses that knowledge to orchestrate their downfall. Every scene was designed to be both dramatically compelling and factually accurate. I played the daughter, Margot played the mother, Thomas, our leading man, played the father, and Elise, Margot's own daughter and my closest friend in the troupe, played the sister. We rehearsed obsessively. Every gesture had to be perfect. Every line delivery had to land with maximum impact. This wasn't just a play. It was a trial. And the verdict had to be unanimous. 3 weeks before opening night, I visited the estate one last time. I needed to see them, to confirm that my memory of their cruelty hadn't been distorted by time and trauma. I needed to be sure. Mother opened the door herself, her face pinching when she saw me. Aria, what an unexpected surprise. She still couldn't bring herself to say pleasure. I came to invite you to my performance, Ves, I said, handing her the envelope. The Grand Celestial Theater. I'm playing the lead. Father appeared behind her, filling the doorway with his bulk. The theater? I thought you'd grown out of that childish fantasy. Evidently not. I kept my voice level, pleasant. It's a special production. I think you'll find it illuminating. Clarissa swept down the stairs, beautiful as ever in a dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Little sister, still playing dress-up for the peasants? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How quaint. I looked at the three of them, these people who had shaped me through cruelty, who had tried to break me, who had murdered me in another life. They looked back at me with contempt and indifference, already dismissing me, already forgetting I existed. Perfect, I thought. Stay exactly that arrogant. I do hope you'll come, I said. It would mean the world to me. I left before they could respond, knowing they would come. They couldn't resist the opportunity to mock me. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The first 4 acts of The House of Wolves would be performed as scripted, a dramatic but somewhat abstract tale of family dysfunction and rebirth. The audience would be moved, perhaps even shocked by the intensity of the performances, but it would still feel like fiction. Then, in Act 5, I would drop the mask entirely. I'd written a final monologue for the daughter, a confession and accusation rolled into one, where she would name her abusers and present evidence of their crimes to the court, represented by the audience. But I'd kept the specifics vague in rehearsals, telling Margot and the others that I would improvise the details based on the energy of the room. The truth was, I planned to name my real family, to present real evidence, to turn the performance into a public trial. It was risky. It was potentially career-ending. It could land me in legal trouble, but it was also justice. And I'd been dead before. I wasn't afraid of consequences anymore. The night before opening night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small room above the theater, staring at the ceiling, running through my plan for the 1,000th time. Every detail had to be perfect. The evidence had to be irrefutable. The performance had to be transcendent. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about every child who'd been abused by the people who should have protected them. Every sibling who'd been pitted against another. Every person who'd been told they were worthless by the voices that should have built them up. I was going to tell their story too. And the world was going to listen. Opening night arrived like an execution date. I stood backstage, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. The theater was packed, over 1,000 people, including theater critics, nobles, merchants, and common folk who'd scraped together coin for standing room tickets. Word had spread that the Moonlight Players' final performance at the Grand Celestial was going to be something special. They had no idea how right they were. Margot found me in my dressing room an hour before curtain. "The house is full," she said. "And I spotted your family, front row, center, just like you wanted." I nodded, too focused to speak. I was already halfway into character, feeling the daughter's pain and rage flowing through me like molten gold. "Aria, Margot put her hands on my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. Once you do this, you can't take it back. Your family will try to destroy you for this. There will be consequences. I know. Are you absolutely certain? I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Timid, beaten down, poisoned by the people who should have loved her. I thought about waking up with a second chance, with knowledge and power and purpose. I thought about every stolen moment, every casual cruelty, every time I'd been made to feel like I didn't matter. I've never been more certain of anything, I said. Margot smiled, fierce and proud. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The orchestra began the overture, and I took my position in the wings. The curtain rose, and I stepped into the light. Act 1. The Hook. The stage was set as a grand dining room, all crystal and candlelight. I sat at the end of a long table, small and isolated, while Margot, Thomas, and Elise lounged at the other end, laughing and toasting each other. The daughter was invisible to her family, a ghost at her own table. Then Elise, the sister, raised a teacup toward me, her smile brilliant and deadly. "To my dear sister," she said, her voice carrying across the theater. "May she finally find her place." I reached for my own cup, brought it to my lips, and froze. The audience couldn't see what I saw, the memory of almond-scented poison, the burning in my throat, the darkness closing in. But they could see my face change, watch understanding and horror dawn in my eyes. I dropped the cup. It shattered on the stage floor, tea spreading like blood. "You poisoned me," I whispered, and the theater was so silent you could hear the words echo off the back wall. "In my first life, you poisoned me." The lights snapped to black, and when they rose again, I was standing center stage alone, dressed in a simple shift that made me look both young and timeless. "Let me tell you a story," I said, and my voice carried to every corner of that vast space. "Let me tell you about the girl who died and was reborn with the memory of her murder." The audience was hooked. I could feel their attention like a physical thing, 1,000 pairs of eyes locked on me, hungry for the story I was about to tell. In the front row, I saw Mother's fan snap open. Perfect. Act 2, the exposition. The lights shifted to a softer, more melancholic tone as the set transformed around me, the dining room becoming a series of vignettes, small scenes from a childhood of systematic abuse. I narrated while the other actors performed scenes around me, showing the audience the slow destruction of a child's spirit. "I was born unwanted," I began, walking through the scenes like a ghost. "A second daughter, a spare, a mistake. My mother told me I nearly killed her coming into the world, and I spent the rest of my childhood trying to make up for the sin of being born." Margot moved through a scene where the mother character struck the young daughter for spilling wine, her face twisted with disgust. "You're useless," she hissed. "Why couldn't you be more like your sister?" The audience gasped at the casual violence, but I pressed on. "My sister was perfect," I continued, watching Elise perform a scene where she smiled sweetly while tearing up my sheet music. "Beautiful, talented, beloved, everything I wasn't. And if I ever managed to achieve something through hard work and determination, she would take it from me. My accomplishments became hers, my dreams became hers. Even my name, my identity, became something she could steal." I performed a scene where I discovered my scholarship application had been replaced with Clarissa's, my voice breaking with authentic despair. The audience murmured, moved by the raw emotion. "But the cruelest part," I said, stepping forward to address them directly, "was how they made me doubt myself, how they convinced me that I was the problem, that I was lazy, stupid, worthless, that I deserved their contempt." I could see people in the audience wiping their eyes. In the front row, Mother's face was a mask of stone, but I saw her knuckles whiten around her fan. Father's jaw was clenched. Clarissa looked pale, her eyes darting to the exits. They were starting to understand. And then, on the day I finally escaped, the day I received my acceptance to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, my sister made me tea. The lights dimmed to a single spotlight on me. It tasted like almonds. I collapsed to the stage floor, my body convulsing in a perfect recreation of death by poison. The audience cried out, and when I went still, the silence was absolute. Then I rose, slowly, like a corpse returning to life. But I woke up, I said softly. 7 years in the past, 12 years old again, with all my memories intact, with knowledge of how my story ended, and I made a choice. The lights blazed bright, and I stood tall, transformed from victim to survivor. I chose to change the ending. The audience erupted in applause, but I held up a hand and they quieted. But first, I had to survive. Act 3, the turning point. The set shifted again, becoming darker, more claustrophobic. I narrated my double life. The docile daughter by day, the fierce actress by night. I showed them how I'd swallowed my rage and let it crystallize into purpose. How I'd found the moonlight players and discovered my true calling. I learned how to act, I said, moving through scenes of rehearsals and performances. I learned how to become someone else, but more importantly, I learned how to take the truth and shape it into something powerful, something that couldn't be ignored. I performed a montage of my training, my growth, my transformation from broken girl to formidable artist. The audience watched me evolve in real time, watched the daughter become dangerous. And I documented everything, I said, pulling out a leather journal, a real one, filled with my actual notes. Every cruel word, every stolen achievement, every crime. I opened the journal and began reading entries, my voice steady and clear. Age 13. Mother struck me across the face for questioning why Clarissa received new dresses while I wore altered hand-me-downs. She said I should be grateful for anything I received. Age 14. Father refused to pay for my education, saying it was a waste of money. That same week, he purchased a yacht. Age 15. Clarissa submitted my essay under her name and won the provincial writing competition. When I confronted her, she told me I should be honored to help her succeed. With each entry, the audience's anger grew. I could feel it building, a righteous fury that matched my own. In the front row, my family sat frozen. They couldn't leave. Doing so would confirm their guilt. They couldn't defend themselves. We were in the middle of a performance. All they could do was sit there and listen as I exposed them, piece by piece. But I needed more than just personal testimony, I said. I needed proof. The lights shifted, and projected on screens behind me appeared scanned documents, financial records, forged signatures, letters that proved embezzlement and fraud. I'd spent months gathering these, calling in favors from clerks and lawyers, piecing together the paper trail of my family's corruption. My father has been embezzling from his business partners for 15 years, I said, pointing to the documents. Over 200,000 gold crowns, stolen from trusts and accounts, hidden in overseas holdings. Thomas performed a scene as the father counting money in a darkened office, his face twisted with greed. My mother has been conducting an affair with our family attorney for a decade, I continued, using his legal expertise to help my father hide his crimes. Margot and another actor performed a brief, damning scene of the mother and the lawyer conspiring over wine. And my sister, I turned to face Elise, who stood center stage in a beautiful gown, has destroyed the lives and reputations of no less than 5 young men, seducing them and then discarding them when they'd served their purpose. One of them took his own life. The audience gasped. In the front row, Clarissa had gone white as snow. But their greatest crime, I said softly, and the theater fell silent again, was stealing my inheritance. The screens changed to show legal documents, my grandmother's will, the trust that had been established in my name, and the forged papers that had allowed my parents to access the funds. My grandmother left me 300,000 gold crowns, I said. Money meant to ensure I could escape, could build a life independent of my family's cruelty. My parents forged my signature and emptied the account. I was 17. I never saw a single coin. The audience was in an uproar now, shouting their disapproval. In the front row, Father had gone red, his hands clenched into fists. Mother's fan fluttered uselessly. Clarissa was crying, her perfect makeup streaking down her face. I felt no pity, only cold, clean satisfaction. So I made a plan, I said, and my voice cut through the noise. A plan for justice. a plan to take back everything they stole from me. The lights dimmed to a single spotlight on me once more. This plan. Act 4, the climax. The set exploded into activity. The orchestra swelled into a dramatic score as we launched into the longest, most complex sequence of the play, The Daughter's Revenge. I narrated over the action, walking through elaborate scenes that showed how I'd orchestrated my family's downfall. I started by ensuring my father's embezzlement would be discovered, I said, as Thomas performed a scene of the father receiving a summons from royal auditors. I sent anonymous tips to every authority who might investigate. I provided documentation, timelines, witness statements. I made it impossible to ignore. The audience watched as the father character's empire crumbled. Business partners turning against him, assets being seized, his name becoming synonymous with fraud and corruption. For my mother, I continued, I ensured her affair became public knowledge. I arranged for her and the lawyer to be seen together at a society event by every gossip in the capital. Her reputation, the thing she valued most, was destroyed in an evening. Margot performed a scene where the mother was cut by her social circle, her friends turning their backs, her invitations torn up before her eyes. The actress made the mother's devastation palpable, and the audience cheered. And for my sister, I turned to Elise, who stood center stage looking defiant. I simply told the truth. I performed a series of short, devastating scenes where I tracked down each of the men Clarissa had destroyed and helped them tell their stories. One by one, they came forward with evidence of her manipulation, her cruelty, her callous disregard for anyone but herself. The one who had died, I read his final letter, his words describing how she'd made him believe she loved him before discarding him like trash, how he couldn't bear the humiliation. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even the cynical theater critics were moved. Her engagement to the Duke's son was canceled, I said, watching Elise perform the sister's breakdown with terrifying authenticity. Her friends abandoned her. Her reputation was even more thoroughly destroyed than our mother's. She became what she'd always accused me of being, worthless. But I wasn't done. The climax built to a fever pitch as I revealed the final piece of my revenge. And then, I said, I called my grandmother. The stage went dark except for a single light on a chair where an actress I'd hired for this one scene sat, playing my grandmother, the woman I'd never really known in my first life because my parents had kept us apart. She was alive, I said softly. In this life, in this timeline. She hadn't died yet. She was elderly and ill, yes, but alive. And when I told her what her son had done, how he'd forged documents and stolen my inheritance, how he'd abused and neglected me, she was horrified. The actress playing my grandmother stood, trembling with rage, and delivered a monologue I'd written that captured everything I wished my real grandmother could have said. He was always weak, she said, her voice carrying despite her character's age. Always grasping, always cruel. I hoped he would be different with his own children. But he became his father, brutal and greedy. And you, child, she turned to me, you survived him. You became strong in spite of him. That is worth more than any inheritance. The audience was weeping openly now. She used her considerable remaining influence to ensure my father faced criminal charges, I said. She testified against him herself, providing evidence of his pattern of fraud dating back decades. She cut him and my mother from her will entirely and ensured I received not just my original inheritance, but half of her estate. I smiled, and it was a knife's edge. My father is currently in debtor's prison, awaiting trial for embezzlement. If convicted, he'll spend the rest of his life there. The audience cheered, actually cheered. In the front row, father was standing, his face purple with rage. Mother pulled at his arm, trying to get him to sit, to not make a scene. But it was too late. Everyone could see them. Everyone knew. My mother, I continued, lost everything, her social standing, her marriage, her reputation. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment on the charity of distant cousins who despise her. More cheers. Mother's fan dropped from nerveless fingers. And my sister, I looked directly at Clarissa, found that no one wanted anything to do with a known seductress and social climber. Her beauty couldn't save her. Her charm couldn't save her. She was ruined, completely and utterly. Clarissa was sobbing now, hunched over in her seat, her shoulders shaking. Part of me felt something like pity. But I crushed it. She'd poisoned me. She'd stolen years of my life. She'd murdered me. This was mercy compared to what she'd done to me. But the greatest victory, I said, and my voice softened, became almost gentle, was discovering who I actually was. The stage transformed one final time, becoming a theater, a mirror of the one we were actually standing in. I stood center stage in the fictional theater, taking a bow to thunderous applause. I was an actress, I said. Not a daughter, not a sister, not a victim. An artist. Someone who could take pain and transform it into something beautiful and true. Someone who could tell stories that mattered. I gestured to the audience, to the real theater around us. Someone who could make you feel what I felt, and in doing so, make you understand what it means to survive. The orchestra swelled into a triumphant crescendo, and I launched into the final sequence, a rapid montage of the daughter's new life. Me performing in grand theaters to sold-out crowds, me laughing with the Moonlight Players, my real family, the people who saw my worth, me receiving awards and accolades, me being interviewed by papers and journals, telling my story to the world, me being happy, me being free. The stage filled with light, golden and warm, and I stood at the center of it all, arms outstretched, head thrown back in joy. "This is my revenge," I declared, my voice ringing through the theater. "Not their destruction, though that is sweet. My revenge is my survival, my success, my refusal to let them make me small." The music reached its peak, and I delivered the final lines of the scripted play. I was murdered by my family, but I was reborn, and I chose to become more than they ever imagined I could be. The lights began to fade, and the audience erupted into applause. But I held up my hand once more, and something in my gesture, something raw and urgent, made them quiet. "But this isn't just a story," I said, and my voice dropped from the theatrical projection to something quieter, more intimate, more dangerous. "This isn't fiction." Act 5, the epilogue. I stepped to the edge of the stage, as close to the audience as I could get without leaving it entirely. Behind me, Margot, Thomas, and Elise remained frozen in their final positions, but I could feel their support, their solidarity. "My name," I said clearly, is not Arya Blackwood. That is my stage name, the identity I created to protect myself while I built this new life. My real name is Adelaide Thornhill." The gasp from the audience was immediate. The Thornhill name was well known in the capital: old money, shipping magnates, pillars of society. "And these are my parents," I said, pointing directly at the front row. "Lord Marcus Thornhill and Lady Helena Thornhill. And that is my sister, Clarissa Thornhill." Every eye in the theater turned to them. Father was on his feet now, his face contorted with rage. "This is slander," he roared. "Lies! I'll have you arrested for defamation." "Then arrest me," I said calmly. "But first, perhaps the authorities should examine the documents I've submitted to the Royal Treasury, the ones proving you've been embezzling from your investment partners for 15 years. Father's face went from red to white in an instant. "Or perhaps," I continued, "Lady Thornhill would like to explain her relationship with attorney Bernard Whitmore. I have sworn statements from 3 of your household staff detailing the nature of your meetings with him. I also have the hotel records." Mother made a sound like a wounded animal. "And Clarissa," I turned my full attention to my sister, who looked like she wanted to melt into her seat. "Perhaps you'd like to address the families of Jeffrey Ashton, Thomas Marbury, and William Kellerman?" "Oh, that's right. William can't hear your apology. He's dead. His suicide note mentioned you by name." Clarissa screamed, actually screamed, and tried to bolt for the exit. But the crowd was too dense, and people blocked her way, their faces hard with judgment. "Everything I depicted tonight is true," I said, and my voice carried absolute conviction. "Every scene of abuse, every stolen achievement, every crime. I have documentation. I have witnesses. I have 5 years' worth of evidence that I've been compiling with the help of investigators and attorneys." I pulled out another leather folder, this one thick with papers, and held it up. "This contains copies of everything. financial records proving embezzlement and fraud, medical records documenting years of physical abuse, testimony from servants, teachers, and family friends, letters in their own handwriting proving conspiracy and manipulation, and most damningly, I pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a toxicology report from my grandmother's personal physician. The audience leaned forward collectively. 3 months ago, my grandmother fell suddenly and mysteriously ill. The symptoms were consistent with slow-acting poison, specifically arsenic. When I suggested testing, we found trace amounts in her food. Someone in the household had been poisoning her. I looked at my family, and my smile was terrible. Someone who stood to inherit her fortune if she died before she could change her will. Someone who knew that I'd reconnected with her, that she planned to ensure I received what was rightfully mine. Someone desperate enough to commit murder. "You can't prove that was us!" Mother shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. "You're insane. You've always been inane, making up stories, trying to get attention." "The arsenic was in your private tea blend," I said softly. "The one you had specially imported from the Far East. The one only you and Father drink. The one you personally prepared for Grandmother during her visits." The silence that followed was deafening. "My grandmother survived," I continued, "thanks to early detection and excellent medical care. She's recovering at a private facility under guard, and she's been working with the Crown Prosecutor's Office to build a case against you." I gestured to the wings, and 3 men in the uniform of the Royal Guard stepped onto the stage. The audience murmured in shock and excitement. "Lord Marcus Thornhill, Lady Helena Thornhill," the lead guard said formally, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. Lady Clarissa Thornhill, you are also detained for questioning regarding fraud and conspiracy to commit murder." The theater erupted in chaos. Father tried to fight, actually threw a punch at one of the guards before being restrained. Mother collapsed, wailing. Clarissa just stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking small and broken and utterly defeated. I watched them being led away, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief. Just a hollow kind of peace. "Wait," I called out, and everyone froze. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at my family, my former family, in chains. "I want you to know something," I said quietly. "I didn't do this because I hate you. I did this because I loved myself more than I feared you. I did this because I deserved better than you were capable of giving. I did this because every person who has ever been hurt by someone they trusted deserves to see justice done." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You taught me that I was worthless. But you were wrong. You taught me that I would never amount to anything. But you were wrong. You taught me that blood is thicker than water, that family is everything, that I owed you loyalty no matter what you did to me." I smiled then, bright and fierce. "But you forgot to teach me the most important lesson, that I could walk away, that I could choose a different family, that I could become someone extraordinary despite everything you did to break me. And that is the greatest revenge of all, not your destruction, but my liberation." The guards began to move again, escorting my family toward the exits. Father was shouting threats, Mother was sobbing. Clarissa looked back at me once, and in her eyes I saw something like understanding. Like she finally realized what she'd lost, what she'd thrown away when she chose cruelty over kindness. Too late. Far too late. As they disappeared through the doors, the audience remained silent, stunned by what they'd witnessed. This had been so much more than a play. It had been a public reckoning, a trial by performance, a revolution in dramatic form. I stood alone on the stage, suddenly exhausted, suddenly aware of how much of myself I'd poured into this moment. Then someone started clapping. Just one person, slow and deliberate. I looked up to see Margot standing in the wings, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes blazing with pride. "That," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "is what theater is meant to be. Truth so powerful it changes the world." The audience erupted. Not just applause, they were on their feet, screaming, crying, stomping their feet so hard the balconies shook. The critics in their boxes were scribbling furiously. The nobles were clutching their pearls, scandalized and thrilled in equal measure. The common folk were hugging each other, weeping openly, seeing their own pain reflected and validated. The Moonlight Players joined me on stage, and we took our bows together. Margot took my hand and squeezed it hard enough to hurt. "You did it," she whispered. "You magnificent, terrifying, brilliant girl. You actually did it." I squeezed back, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We bowed again and again as the applause went on and on, flowers raining onto the stage, people shouting my name, both names, Adelaide and Arya, victim and survivor. Truth and performance merged into one. When the curtain finally fell, I collapsed backstage, shaking with adrenaline and relief and a dozen other emotions I couldn't name. Elise wrapped me in a fierce hug while Thomas brought wine. Other troupe members clustered around, laughing and crying and celebrating. "The reviews are going to be insane," someone said. "Insane doesn't begin to cover it," someone else replied. "She just revolutionized theater. She weaponized it." Margot knelt beside me, pushing sweaty hair off my forehead. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel more. Triumphant or satisfied or something. But I just feel empty." "That's normal," she said gently. "Revenge is like that. The anticipation is often more satisfying than the reality." "But Adelaide," she gripped my chin, made me look at her. "You didn't do this just for revenge. You did it for justice, for healing, for every person sitting in that audience who's ever been hurt by their family and thought they had to stay silent." As if summoned by her words, there was a knock at the dressing room door. A young woman stood there, maybe 20, with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, "but I had to tell you, my father, he used to beat me. My mother said it was normal, that I deserved it, that I should be grateful he didn't do worse. I believed them. I thought I was broken." She took a shaky breath. "But watching you, tonight, watching you stand there and say that you deserved better, that what they did was wrong, I realized I wasn't broken. They were. And I don't have to protect them anymore. I can tell the truth, too." She wasn't the only one. Over the next hour, a dozen people came backstage with similar stories. Some wanted to share their own experiences with abuse. Others wanted to thank me for giving voice to their pain. A few were journalists asking for interviews, wanting to know more about my story and what I plan to do next. I spoke with all of them, as many as I could, until my voice was hoarse and my emotions were rubbed raw. Each conversation reinforced what Margot had said. This wasn't just about my revenge. It was about breaking the silence around familial abuse. It was about showing that victims could become survivors, that survivors could become warriors, that warriors could create art that changed the world. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story exploded across the capital like wildfire. Every newspaper ran headlines about the Thornhill scandal and my dramatic exposure. Some praised me as a brave truth-teller. Others condemned me for airing private family matters in such a public forum. But everyone was talking about it. The reviews of The House of Wolves were unprecedented. A searing indictment of familial cruelty that transcends performance to become testimony, wrote the lead critic for the Royal Arts Journal. Adelaide Thornhill, or Arya Blackwood, or whatever name she chooses to wear, has fundamentally altered what theater can be. She has made it a weapon, a shield, and a sanctuary all at once. The Grand Celestial extended our run for another month. Every performance sold out within hours of tickets being released. People came not just to see a play, but to witness the space where justice had been done, where a victim had transformed into a victor. My family's legal troubles mounted daily. The Crown Prosecutor's Office, armed with the evidence I'd provided and galvanized by the public attention, threw everything they had at the case. Father was formally charged with 15 counts of embezzlement, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and 1 count of attempted murder. Mother faced charges as an accessory to most of those crimes, plus her own counts of fraud related to my stolen inheritance. Clarissa surprisingly turned state's evidence. She provided testimony against our parents in exchange for a reduced sentence on the fraud charges. I learned later that she'd been just as controlled and manipulated by them as I had, in different ways. Her perfection demanded rather than chosen. Her cruelty learned rather than innate. In another life, in different circumstances, we might have been allies instead of enemies. But not in this life. Some wounds go too deep to heal. Grandmother recovered fully and, true to her word, ensured I received not just my original inheritance, but a substantial portion of her estate. "You're the only one who deserves it," she told me when I visited her. "The only one who became something worth being." She came to see the play 3 times, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face, applauding until her hands were red. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you," she said after the final performance. "I should have known. I should have seen." "You couldn't have known," I replied. "They were very good at hiding it, and I was very good at pretending to be fine." "You're not pretending anymore," she observed. "That's worth everything." The Moonlight Players received offers from theaters across the continent. We were suddenly the most sought-after troupe in the world, with everyone wanting to see what we'd do next. Margot was fielding offers for permanent residencies at prestigious venues, commission requests for new works, even a few proposals from playwrights who wanted to adapt my story into authorized versions. "What do you want to do?" she asked me one evening, a month after our triumph. We were sitting in her office, surrounded by contracts and letters and possibilities. I looked at the woman who'd saved me, who'd given me a family when mine had only given me pain, who'd helped me transform my trauma into art. "I want to keep telling stories," I said. "True stories. Stories about people who survive things they shouldn't have to survive. I want to give voice to the voiceless and make audiences uncomfortable. I want to change what theater can be." Margot smiled, that fierce, proud smile I'd come to love. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll build something new. A theater company dedicated to truth-telling, to stories that matter, to art that demands justice." "The House of Wolves Theater Company," I suggested. "Perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." We spent the next weeks planning our future. We'd accept the residency at the Grand Celestial, but maintain our independence, producing our own works and inviting other artists whose stories needed to be told. We'd create a fund to help abuse survivors access legal resources and therapeutic support. We'd use our platform not just for entertainment, but for activism, for change, for healing. It was ambitious. It was audacious. It was exactly what I'd been reborn to do. 6 months after the performance that changed everything, I stood in a courtroom watching my father receive his sentence. 25 years in Blackstone Prison, the judge intoned, for crimes of embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. You betrayed the trust of your partners, your family, and your own mother. You showed no remorse and no conscience. The court shows you no mercy. Father didn't even look at me as they led him away. He'd aged a decade in 6 months, his hair gone completely gray, his face gaunt. He looked like what he'd always been, a small, cruel man whose power had finally been stripped away. Mother received 12 years as an accessory. Clarissa received 5 years probation and a substantial fine, with the requirement that she attend therapy and perform community service. It wasn't enough, not really, but it was something. It was acknowledgement that what they'd done was wrong, that there were consequences for cruelty, that victims could fight back and win. As I left the courthouse, I was mobbed by reporters. Questions flew at me from every direction. How does it feel to see justice done? Do you forgive them? What's next for you? Will you write another autobiographical play? I held up my hand for silence, and remarkably, they gave it to me. I'm often asked if I forgive my family. I said clearly. The answer is no. Forgiveness is not something they've earned, and it's not something I owe them. What they did to me was unforgivable, but I've learned that I don't need to forgive them to be free of them. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Justice has been served today, but this isn't really about revenge or punishment. It's about breaking cycles. It's about showing that abuse doesn't have to be endured in silence, that families don't have the right to destroy their children, that victims can become survivors and survivors can become warriors. I looked directly into the nearest camera. If you're being hurt by someone who claims to love you, please know it's not your fault. You don't deserve it. You are not broken. And you can escape. It won't be easy. It might take years, like it took me. But you can do it. You can build a new life. You can become someone extraordinary. I smiled then, genuine and warm. I did. And if a girl who was poisoned by her own sister can stand here today, free and successful and happy, then anyone can. I promise you that. The reporters erupted with more questions, but I was done. I walked away from the courthouse, from the reporters, from the final chapter of my old life. Margot was waiting for me at the corner in a carriage, Elise and Thomas beside her. My real family. The people who'd chosen me and been chosen in return. "How do you feel?" Margot asked as I climbed in. I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Relieved, certainly. Vindicated, absolutely. But more than that, lighter. Like I'd been carrying a crushing weight for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. And now, finally, I could breathe. "Free," I said simply. I feel free. "Good," she said, squeezing my hand. "Because we have a show tonight, and the Crown Princess is in the audience. Apparently, your story inspired her to commission a play about women's suffrage. She wants to discuss it with you after the performance." I laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained. "Of course she does. What's the play?" "Something new I've been working on," Margot said with a sly smile. "About a princess who refuses to be married off for political alliance and instead runs away to lead a revolution. Thought you might be perfect for the lead." "Another revolutionary woman?" I teased. "People are going to think that's all we do." "That's because it is all we do," Elise interjected. "We revolutionize one performance at a time." "Plus," Thomas added with a grin, "we're very good at it. Why mess with a winning formula?" The carriage rattled through the streets of the capital, taking us toward the theater, toward another performance, toward the future I'd fought so hard to claim. I looked out the window at the city I'd made my home, the streets I'd walked as both victim and victor, and I felt something I'd never experienced in my first life. Hope. Pure, undiluted hope for what came next. That night's performance was electric. The theater was packed as always, with the Crown Princess and her entourage in the royal box. We were performing The House of Wolves again. By popular demand, we'd never actually stopped performing it. But each show was different now, evolved. I'd begun improvising new sections, responding to audience reactions, making the piece more interactive and immediate. Tonight, I added a new epilogue. After the final scripted scene, after the applause died down, I stepped forward alone once more. "When I was reborn," I said quietly, "I thought my second chance was about revenge, about making my family pay for what they'd done to me. And yes, that was part of it. Justice had to be served. But I've learned something in these months since that night when I exposed them." I gestured to the audience, to the theater, to the world beyond. My second chance wasn't really about them at all. It was about me, about discovering who I was beneath the layers of abuse and pain, about becoming someone I could be proud of, about building a family I chose instead of one I was born into. I smiled at Margot and the others in the wings. About transforming suffering into art, pain into purpose, trauma into truth. I walked to the very edge of the stage, looking out at the sea of faces. If I could give anything to those of you who are still suffering, still trapped, still believing the lies your abusers tell you, it would be this: you are not what they say you are. You are not weak or worthless or deserving of pain. You are strong enough to survive them. You are valuable enough to deserve better. You are worthy of love and respect and happiness. My voice strengthened, filled with absolute conviction. And someday, when you're free, when you've built your new life and become the person you were always meant to be, you'll look back and realize the truth. They didn't break you. They tried, but they failed. You survived, you won, and that is the greatest revenge of all. The audience rose to their feet, applauding so hard the chandeliers shook. But I barely heard it. I was looking at a young woman in the third row, maybe 16, with bruises barely hidden by makeup, with tears streaming down her face. She was nodding, her lips forming the words, "Thank you." I nodded back. acknowledging her, seeing her, telling her without words, I know, I understand, you will survive this. That, I realized, was why I'd been given this second chance. Not just to destroy my abusers, but to light a path for others still in the darkness. To show them that escape was possible, that healing was real, that life on the other side of trauma could be beautiful and full and worth living. We took our final bows, and as the curtain fell, I heard Margot whisper, "You've done something extraordinary, Adelaide. You've turned your pain into power. You've made your suffering mean something." "We did it together," I corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you, without all of you." "That's what family does," she said simply. "Real family, chosen family. We lift each other up. We help each other transform. We make each other stronger." After the performance, I met with the crown princess as promised. She was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. "Your story has inspired something in this kingdom," she told me. "People are talking about abuse differently now. They're questioning the sanctity of family when family is cruel. They're demanding legal reforms to protect children and give victims more recourse." "That's what I'd hoped for," I admitted. "I want to commission more work from you," she said. "Stories about other injustices, other silenced voices. I want to use theater as a tool for social change. Will you help me?" I looked at Margot, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," I said, "absolutely yes." We discussed details late into the night, plays about workers' rights, about women's suffrage, about economic inequality, about all the ways society failed its most vulnerable members. The princess had resources and political will. I had stories and the platform to tell them. Together, we could actually change things. It was intoxicating, realizing that my second life had led to this. Not just personal victory, but the opportunity to fight for justice on a larger scale. To take everything I'd learned from my suffering and use it to prevent others' suffering. To make my rebirth mean something. 1 year after the performance that changed my life, I stood on stage at the Grand Celestial for a very different kind of show. It was the anniversary gala, and we were premiering 3 new plays in one night. Short pieces by survivors of abuse performed by the House of Wolves Theater Company. I'd spent months working with the writers, helping them shape their stories, teaching them what Margot had taught me about refining pain into art. The theater was filled with nobles and commoners alike. Our productions had become events that transcended class boundaries. In the audience were advocates, activists, lawmakers, journalists, and hundreds of survivors who'd found their voices through our work. I gave the opening address, standing in the spot where I'd exposed my family exactly 1 year ago. "Tonight," I said, "Wamase, we celebrate not just survival, but transformation. We celebrate the courage it takes to tell your truth. We celebrate the power of art to change hearts and minds, and we celebrate the community we've built together, a community of warriors who refuse to stay silent." The performances were stunning, raw and honest and heartbreaking and ultimately triumphant. Each writer had taken their trauma and shaped it into something meaningful, something that connected them to others who'd suffered similarly. Each story was unique, but the thread running through them all was the same. I survived. I'm still here. I matter. After the final performance, after the standing ovation, after the flowers and the tears and the celebrations, I found myself alone backstage for a moment. I looked at my reflection in the dressing room mirror. 20 years old now, so different from the girl who had died at 19 in another life. That girl had been broken by her family, convinced she was worthless, poisoned because she'd dared to dream of escape. This girl, this woman, was strong, successful, surrounded by people who loved her, using her pain to help others, making a difference in the world. "I did it," I whispered to my reflection, to the ghost of who I'd been. I survived them, I won, and I became someone extraordinary. My reflection smiled back, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt completely at peace with both my lives, the one that had been stolen and the one I'd claimed for myself. There was a knock at the door. "Adelaide?" It was Elise. "They're asking for another curtain call. The audience won't stop applauding." I took one last look at my reflection, then stood and adjusted my costume. "Let's give them a show they'll never forget," I said. As I walked back onto that stage, into the light and the applause and the love of hundreds of people who saw me and valued me and believed in me, I thought about the girl who'd drunk poison tea and died alone. This is for you, I told her silently. This is for both of us. We made it. We're finally free. The applause swelled, and I took my bow, surrounded by my chosen family, my real family, knowing that I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and transformed it into the best thing. I'd been reborn. I'd joined a traveling troupe, and I'd exposed my family's crimes on stage while they watched, helpless and horrified. But more than that, so much more than that, I'd discovered who I really was. And I was magnificent. 5 years later, the House of Wolves Theater Company had become an institution. We now had permanent venues in 3 cities, a training program for aspiring actors, and a foundation that provided legal and therapeutic support to abuse survivors. Our plays had sparked legislative changes, inspired social movements, and given voice to thousands of silenced stories. I was 25, an accomplished actress, playwright, and director. My name was known not just in the capital but across the continent. I'd written a dozen plays, trained hundreds of students, and used my platform to advocate for the powerless. Grandmother had passed away the previous year, peacefully in her sleep, content in the knowledge that I was happy and successful. She'd left me everything, making me independently wealthy. Not that I needed it. The theater company was profitable, my plays were in demand, and I'd made enough from various ventures to never worry about money again. Father died in prison, bitter and unrepentant to the end. I didn't attend his funeral. Mother was released after serving her sentence and immediately left the capital, moving to a distant province where no one knew her name. I heard she'd become a recluse, broken by shame and isolation. Sometimes I thought about visiting her, but I never did. We had nothing left to say to each other. Clarissa, surprisingly, had turned her life around. After completing her probation and therapy, she'd begun working with one of our foundation's partner organizations, helping young women escape abusive situations. She'd written me a letter a year ago, apologizing for everything she'd done, explaining how our parents had manipulated her just as they'd abused me, asking not for forgiveness but for understanding. I'd written back, not forgiveness, I still couldn't give her that, but acknowledgement that she was trying to be better, that she was doing good work, that perhaps someday we might be able to have a civil conversation. It was more than I'd ever thought possible. On the anniversary of the House of Wolves premiere, I stood on stage at the Grand Celestial once more. We were performing it one final time before retiring the production. It had played over 500 performances, been seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and inspired countless others to tell their own stories. This time, there were no ghosts in the front row, no abusers to confront, just an audience filled with people who'd been moved and changed by the story, who'd found courage in my courage, who'd transformed their own pain into purpose. As I delivered the final lines, I was murdered by my family, but I was reborn, and I chose to become more than they ever imagined I could be. I felt a sense of completion, of a circle finally closing. This chapter of my life was ending, but not because I was running from it or because I'd been defeated. It was ending because I'd said everything I needed to say, done everything I'd been reborn to do, become everything I was meant to be. The curtain fell for the last time on the House of Wolves, and when it rose again for the final bows, the entire theater was on their feet, applauding not just the performance, but what it represented. 5 years of transformation, of healing, of using art to fight injustice. Margot took my hand as we bowed together. "What's next?" she asked. "You've conquered the theater world. Where do you go from here?" I smiled, already knowing the answer. "Everywhere," I said. "We go everywhere. There are still stories to tell, still voices to amplify, still battles to fight." This was just the beginning. As we took our final bow and the applause washed over us like a benediction, I thought about the 2 lives I'd lived. One stolen by poison, one reclaimed through art. The girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. The family that had tried to destroy me and the family I'd chosen instead. I'd been given an impossible gift, a second chance, a rebirth, knowledge of how my story was supposed to end. And I'd rewritten that ending entirely. I'd turned tragedy into triumph, pain into power, death into life. I'd survived, I'd thrived, I'd won. And that, I thought, as the curtain fell for the final time, was the greatest story of all.